Hello, this is Mitch Rosenberg. I'm the CEO and co-founder of KinderLab Robotics, and I'm glad to be speaking to you today about the very best in TK and elementary education programs and how they have to include STEM in 2023 and beyond. I'll be your presenter today. If you have any questions at all, feel free to use the questions function in your GoToMeeting application. I will try to answer them in real time if I can. And if I don't get them, I'll simply go from slide to slide. If you are interested in getting a copy of this slide presentation, feel free to email me. My email is showing right now. You can also call me or text me on my mobile. And without further ado, I look forward to sharing our thoughts about the very best in TK and elementary education and how they can incorporate STEM for the earliest learners. The important thing to note here is that STEM literacy, while it may be new to the earliest of learners, is a problem that matters all through a child's education. And there's lots of evidence in lots of fields that need is growing. First of all, the demand for STEM educated workforce and populace is growing independent of what the schools do. There are increasing STEM requirements for both jobs that are already identified as STEM oriented, like engineering or research science, but also in non-STEM jobs. We hear often about folks who manage restaurants being called upon to create spreadsheets and do other STEM related activities. The challenge is that American competitiveness in math and other STEM fields is not as strong as we might hope. And there are significant achievement gaps according to economic factors or demographic factors. Recent research, some of it by my co-founder, Professor Marina Bears, indicates that early childhood is absolutely the right time to introduce STEM, despite the fact that many school programs really focus on introducing STEM in middle school or later. The problem with that is lots of research shows that developmentally kids become disinterested in STEM if they haven't already been exposed, often around the fourth grade. In addition, the cost to create a STEM educated person, the cost is much higher in older grades. That is to say, the returns on an investment of $1 invested in early grades is so much higher than trying to catch up in later grades. So there's lots of evidence, both developmentally and economically, that if we're gonna make STEM important, we have to make it important in early elementary school. So how would we do this? I mean, it's not so easy to figure out how to make a STEM curriculum for the youngest learners. Well, the ideal solution would cover the entire gamut from TK to the end of elementary school. But the challenge for that is that students at that age are developmentally capable of learning from tangible or often visual or kinetic learning, but they're not ready for abstract learning, and lots of STEM is in fact abstract. So the ideal solution would be somehow created to be age appropriate for those skills. In addition, the ideal solution would be proven already so that educators don't have to roll their own. And in particular, they will want to be proven in a wide variety of STEM areas, not limited to just coding, which introduces all kinds of skills like sequencing, but also things like building, understanding sensors, understanding variables, understanding testing. And the best STEM programs, we think, also incorporate meta principles such as creative problem-solving techniques and figuring out how to collaborate with others to create a solution, not just build it yourself. And finally, the ideal solution would have to be easy for educators who just don't have the time to create something of their own, that in many cases in early childhood aren't necessarily personally focused on STEM themselves, and yet are called upon to integrate STEM into an already jammed curriculum that also meets state and federal requirements. In fact, the ideal solution would be something an educator can incorporate in their classroom without the support of an IT staff, or even necessarily with PCs or other technical devices. So to make it easy, it's got to be something they can do themselves without too much support. This is probably the best time for me to introduce the product that my company, KinderLab Robotics, created over 10 years ago. Kibo is the name of this product. It's designed for early childhood, and it meets many of these ideal criteria for a product that will help young children really get excited about STEM. So first of all, it's physical. It's not virtual. There is no screen, there is no keyboard, there is no PC needed, there is no phone needed. So the learner can in fact build and program this device with no screens and no keyboards. In addition, it's a completely open-ended system. There isn't one right answer. There isn't even a couple of right answers. It is completely open-ended, and it's designed from bottom up to encourage the addition of the A into STEM to make it STEAM. That A is for arts. And because it's designed specifically for early childhood, it's actually also easy for educators and their families to learn it as well. So here's a picture on the left of a complete set of Kibo. What you see in the foreground are the blocks, each of which has a picture and a word that indicates which programming step is represented by that block. And every programming step is represented by a wooden block, a very common manipulative that's found in every early childhood classroom. All you have to do is peg the blocks together in a logical sequence to create a program. And then in the background, you can see a fully built robot. That robot comes apart into pieces, and even 4-year-olds can build it. Now you may wonder, how do the ideas represented by those blocks get into the processor of the robot? Well, you see on the right, 2 girls that are using their Kibo robot. The scanning function in the end of the Kibo robot scans each block individually, reinforcing physically the critical concepts of sequencing. So it's one thing to make these ideas tangible, but it's another thing to measure whether the ideas are effective. And Kibo is based on over 20 years of research that proves the effectiveness. A couple examples of these classroom tested conclusions are that introducing Kibo in preschool and in 1st and 2nd grade improved the idea of sequencing for kindergartners. 62% was the measured number. It also not only can develop people's skills, but just as importantly, it can develop students' attitudes. So for example, young girls who are not always encouraged by their social environment to be interested in STEM subjects find that they are enjoying being an engineer is something they can agree with. That increases 85% after a unit of Kibo is introduced to their classroom. And Kibo isn't just a product. It includes over 180 hours of proven and detailed lesson plans that include background theory and examples, as well as the details of step-by-step how to implement the plan. And while these are not necessary, and some teachers can teach themselves, we also offer live video and in-person personal development and teaching. So in summary, Kibo is a product for young children that we believe embodies all of STEAM, including building, coding, incorporating the arts, and eventually playing with it so that the fun of STEM stays with them long after they finish their class time. Now, I mentioned all these research results, and the research results are partly from the co-founder of the company, Professor Marina Bears. She's the chief scientist and co-founder of the company. She was the chair of the well-known Elliott Pearson School at Tufts University. She's moved now to Boston College, where she's a professor of both early childhood education and computer science. And she's the inventor of the prototypes that eventually became Kibo. She's also co-developer of the Scratch Junior fully online STEM development platform. Professor Baer's research is well over 20 years and includes not only a wide variety of peer-reviewed papers, but also several books that I strongly encourage any teacher interested in learning more about how young children begin to get excited about and actually learn the abstract concepts in STEM. Here are the 4 books, and I particularly want to encourage you to consider her most recent book from last year, Beyond Coding, which talks about how the concepts of STEM and the practice of STEM in early childhood can help children learn things that are what we call meta skills, emotional development skills, even spiritual and values skills. And you'll find on our website a wide variety of papers and articles that Professor Baer and her research team have published over the years. Now, one of the reasons why Kibo is an ideal product for early childhood STEM is it speaks to children in language that they already understand. And that language is basically called a story. And there's lots of ways we know to express stories, and the children have to learn many of them. They want to learn how to draw. They want to learn how to write. Oh, excuse me, I don't know why that happened. But here's another way to tell a story. The sequence of blocks you see at the top are programming for the Kibo robot at the lower right to tell a story. And by incorporating some art to identify what the robot is this time you're playing with it, and using some common classroom items, the child and that child's co-workers can in fact tell a story about a fire truck rescuing a building. That's the basic idea behind why Kibo is so successful for young children. And it's really important that Kibo is built in advance to incorporate all these art supplies and many, many, many others. These are things familiar to children, so they feel already comfortable, even though they're learning very new concepts. And storytelling is the language of childhood. It's also a language of many of the CS standards. And so many of our curricula encourage children and also the teachers to choose a story and retell it by using the robot to tell the story and share it with others. And the sharing it with others is an important skill as well. Now, storytelling is very useful, obviously, for typical in-class approaches to teaching STEM concepts, like a dedicated class for STEM, or even cross-curricularly to have a class in reading also include some STEM support. But it's also particularly well suited because stories are self-contained. It's well suited for after-school programs, and Kibo is in use all around the country in after-school programs to enhance and build on what the children are already learning in classrooms. Here's one example. This may be a character familiar to you. The students may have read The House of Pooh Corner, and the teacher may prompt them and ask them to retell part of the story where Piglet and Pooh meet on a blustery day. Or maybe the teacher will ask the student to say, what will happen after the end of House of Pooh Corner? And then they can program the robot to tell a new story of their own imagining. Because Kibo is designed to be so flexible and incorporate the arts, it can become anything that the child can imagine. And in fact, actually in this picture, it's not even incorporating art supplies. This is an add-on that allows Kibo to incorporate popular building blocks, such as Lego brand building blocks. So what kind of things can Kibo become? Well, if you're teaching a cultural unit on cultures outside of the US, you could imagine having a unit where you'd say, program Kibo and dress Kibo to be a dancer from another country. And then the students can share the dances that they've created and tell the background of the cultures that those dances come from. Or if you're teaching a biology unit to young children, perhaps you ask the children to tell the story themselves of what they learned about, for example, the migration patterns of whales by programming the robot to follow the pattern that they learned about, in this case, the whale migrating down the coast of California, using a well-known technique of creating a life-size map and then having the robots traverse the map to demonstrate what the whales are doing in the ocean. And in the case of very, very young children, they may be learning in their story time well-known book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Even the youngest children, 4-year-old children, can build this Kibo and program it to tell a story. Now, here's an example of Kibo being used in an activity that might be well suited for a classroom, but is perfectly suited for an after-school activity, using Kibo to create a game, something that children can imagine themselves and have fun with, and they won't even know at the time that they're learning new skills and troubleshooting those skills while they're enjoying the game they play with their friends. So the important thing is that the kids not only learn the subject, but have fun doing it. But in the background, we know that teachers are responsible for meeting the state and federal requirements, and some of these requirements are new. So here are some examples of California science requirements and how Kibo curriculum explicitly meets many of these requirements. And you'll see that often that they include things I've already told you about, such as including both the hardware, that is the building component, and the software, the programming component with the programming blocks. And the Kibo curricula also include the engineering design process. Obviously, we don't call it the engineering design process right away for 4-year-olds, but it includes a step-by-step approach to how to think about what you want to build, how do you build it, and then test to see if, in fact, it does what you originally conceived. Now, computer science in California in particular is very broadly defined. But what's so interesting to us at KinderLab about how it's defined is it does not require that you use the traditional tools of hardware and software in computer science. And so it's particularly well suited for young kids. So you can use stories explicitly to teach computer science, as I've just discussed, and it will absolutely hit the CS standards of California. And it allows the students to focus on the parts of computer science that are most interesting to them, like problem solving and telling stories, but not the specific hardware or the perhaps mind-numbing software that you find in video games or on-screen learning. So in summary, Kibo is based on 20 years of very rigorous research at both Tufts and Boston College, and in fact, all over the world. And the result is something that is perfectly suited for kids from age roughly 4 to roughly 10. This is very different from the kind of STEM and robot systems that kids in late elementary school or middle school are using. They're different because even the abstract concepts like code are in fact represented physically, not virtually. And so there's lots of movement and kinetic energy and no screens at all. So young children can learn these concepts much more quickly and naturally than if they were staring at screens all day, which are just not developmentally appropriate. Because the Kibo system is designed to be open-ended, it not only allows the children to be expressive, but it also allows the teachers to be expressive. So teachers can, in fact, adapt the curriculum easily to what they happen to be teaching, either in a science class or a reading class, a math class, or even a dedicated STEM class. There is no one way to use Kibo, and so it can be easily adapted to the best ideas that each individual teacher brings to the table. And for that reason, it can be integrated into any school curriculum. It does not require the school curriculum to change to allow Kibo to be used. That concludes the brief summary of why we think STEM is so important in early childhood, and therefore why the very best TK and elementary school programs are beginning to, and in fact, developing STEM in even the earliest grades. I want to invite you to please feel free to reach out to me if you have any comments or questions about the product. If I've given you my personal email, I think I earlier gave you my cell phone. Please do feel free to use them. And we can actually demonstrate the product live anywhere in the world using video techniques like this webinar. If you just email at sales@KinderLabRobotics, we'll be happy to schedule a demo and answer whatever specific questions you have about how to develop a curriculum for early childhood how to use Kibo in the curriculum you've already developed, or any other technical or theoretical questions about STEM, STEAM, and early childhood, I encourage you to consider using this QR code to download our white paper. It's got some fantastic ideas about benefits you might have not already thought of about using robotics, even for the earliest grades. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I have not seen any questions, so I'm going to end, but I'm hoping it's not the end of our interactions. Please do reach out to me with any questions or comments you have. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.